Hello everyone, how you going, and welcome to how real Vermont maple syrup is made, something that I've never given much thought because I've been too busy and too preoccupied just enjoying its taste to even understand the entire process behind it. Look at that. Oh, wait, what? Those are two types. What is...
You'd never guess it, but tucked in this Vermont forest, under a couple feet of snow, is a giant maple syrup farm. In fact, it's the largest maple syrup forest owned by a single-source producer in the world. But at the Maple Guild in Island Pond, Vermont, you won't see guys in flannels carrying buckets of sap. Okay, maybe you'll see some flannel. But here the art of sugaring is more like a science.
I think a lot of people look at maple syrup and they think of table syrup, they think of corn syrup, they think of some of the more popular things that they see on their shelves, right? And that's not who we are or what we do. You can't create this in a lab. This has to come from Mother Nature and the trees.
I love how they've immediately gone out of their way to dispel so many myths around the entire, I guess you would call it beverage or food? I guess it's food, but just how they were talking about the different types of just, I guess, fake maple syrups that people get on their tables in their supermarkets. And they're going, no, it's just not the same, people. You can't be just manufacturing it in a lab, just getting cornstarch and all these things. You have to just tap trees, I can only imagine, and then refine it and refine it and refine it to get this beautiful product that can't really be found anywhere else. And you can really only find that kind of authenticity when you do have these sole providers that aren't going after absolutely top dollar. You know, they really actually care about the product more than just the bottom line. I mean, to be fair, being the biggest sole trader in the world certainly means that you're doing something right. And so I do hope that they go through this entire process and just explain what is going on there. Are they adding caramel? Because that's what it looks like. And how do you even fill 6 bottles at once? Well, I guess there's no better way than that.
3 Jersey boys founded the Maple Guild in 2013.
Oh, wow.
And by 2015, they'd tapped their first maple tree. So the company may be young, but it's not small.
Yeah.
Today it has almost 500,000 taps.
Wow.
That's roughly 133 times as many as the average sugar maker in Vermont. And all those taps are on 24,000 acres of land. In the world of sugaring, that size forest is unheard of.
I was going to say 24,000 acres. I wonder how many trees that ends up being. I mean, I guess they said 500,000 taps, or was that right? 500,000? Almost 500,000 taps. I mean, by the next thing that they showed, there's clearly more than one in a tree. But if we actually come over to Canada, let's just see how big 24,000 acres is. I just searched it up. It is 97 square kilometers. So I don't know how big this is going to be. That's 500 square kilometers, 200. But either way, it's a single owned forest. That is a lot of trees. There we go. That's close enough. And really, you think about all the people that just live in this tiny square, the amount of money and infrastructure and everything that just lives in that, and they just have it all to maple trees. And even though it doesn't look ridiculously impressive compared to some of the national parks that Canada has, really, now I'm just wondering, how do you even pump and pipe all this maple just back to a single source to boil it or whatever you have to do?
So how exactly does the Maple Guild produce syrup on a macro scale?
Yeah.
Well, it all starts with the trees. These are sugar maple trees, and the Maple Guild has 460,000 of them, spanning across the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont and into Canada.
Yeah, right.
Starting in December each year, crews spend 2 months putting plastic taps into each one of these trees by hand.
Oh.
The same tree can be tapped for decades.
Next year we reuse everything, and we tap 8 inches high or low and 8 inches over so that we never harm a tree. It always allows it to heal.
Even the fact that they're just thinking about things like that, you know, they're not just going after every last bit of sap out of that tree, you know, they're actually going, okay, let's just not have to be planting all these trees and having to let them grow and water them. We'll just use it over decades instead of just decimating it in 1 year. And once again, something like that can only really be controlled if you actually care about the thing, you know, they're doing it by hand, they're not just sending some drone squad out just to go and just tap every last living inch of the entire forest. No, they spend 2 months doing 500,000 taps into all these trees, and they actually space it out, they measure it, they know where the last one is, and they just go away from that one. It honestly makes so much sense. But I can only imagine they wouldn't even bring such a thing up if it was a common practice, and so it's amazing to see how these little companies that started, I guess, only 9 years ago, or when did this come out? 2019, so only 6 years after they came out, they were already the biggest sole provider in the world. That is massive growth and very, very impressive.
The sugaring season usually runs from February to April, but that's completely dependent on the weather forecast.
Obviously, when the weather cooperates and when Mother Nature gives us sap to pull, and that's when the temperature is above freezing during the day and below freezing at night, that's when the sap runs.
Right.
When the sap is running, it's extracted either through vacuum tubing or gravity. 6,000 miles of plastic tubing carry the sap from the trees to pump stations. These are called reverse osmosis houses. This is where the sap is collected and the water in the sap is filtered out, leaving a high sugar content concentrate.
Sap has 2% sugar, concentrate has 20% sugar. So what we're doing in the reverse osmosis process is we're pulling water out of the sap and concentrating the maple syrup into another solution.
Wow, okay then. Well, I guess it certainly makes sense from a scientific point of view, and instead of boiling it away to just remove all the liquid content, you just, I guess, reverse osmosis it. But I do want to go back to the pumps that they originally showed. Look at that. Some of this pipe work is ridiculous. And did they say 60,000 K?
6,000 miles of plastic tubing carry the sap from the trees to pump stations.
Insane. So they said 6,000 miles, so what, 10,000 kilometers. That is so much piping, and it's a bit of a shame that it's plastic, but at least they're actually reusing it every year, because that would be a massive outlay of facilities and resources and just things that you wouldn't need to do if you don't need to, especially when I'm sure half of it you would just be hoping to leave up, and so you don't have to be putting it out every year. You just go out with your taps and just re-tap. You don't have to actually relay 10,000 kilometers of tubing. Stuff that. And honestly, I think what I find most impressive is the fact that you have to just go out and plan all your kind of volumes and things to go, okay, we're going to need this diameter pipe to carry all this volume down to here, and then it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Like the plan and the map that you would have to make just in advance to go, okay, in 10 years where we're going to be from now, because we don't want to have to be relaying this stuff, like I said, every single year. And so the kind of forethought that these guys are really working on is pretty darn impressive to go, okay, let's just not kill these trees. Let's just make sure that we're not just making it from corn, and let's also just use the right piping so that even though we do have some vacuum tubes, half of it is just fed by gravity, for goodness sake. Like, let nature do the work all the way through. It's great.
Because so much water is removed during this process, it takes about 44 gallons of sap to make just 1 gallon of maple syrup. That sugar concentrate is loaded up into trucks and brought to the sugar house, where it's finally turned into maple syrup. In traditional sugaring techniques, turning sap into syrup means boiling it over direct heat, so the water evaporates. But the Maple Guild pioneered a new method that speeds up the process. It's called steam crafting. Instead of boiling the sap, it's steam heated at a lower temperature using coils. With this system, the Maple Guild can make 55 gallons of maple syrup in just 90 seconds.
What? 55 gallons in a minute and a half. A whole barrel in a minute and a half. No wonder Canada has an entire reserve of this stuff, because there's no way you could even do that with oil, for goodness sake. Like, how are you making 55 gallons in just a minute? That's ridiculous. I mean, it certainly looks very, very shiny and modern and very, very, very expensive, so you certainly hope that it's going to be paying off, and clearly it is. I mean, I guess they wouldn't be using it if it wouldn't be an economy of scale, so to say, and just paying itself off, but my goodness, how do you invent an entire machine? And I mean, hopefully I didn't cut them off, but I'm now wondering how long does it usually take to make 55 gallons, because if you can make 55 gallons in 90 seconds compared to, I don't know, a day, like, it's not even a comparison there. And just so I can try and remember it a bit better, they say 44 gallons of sap equals 1 gallon of syrup, but do they mean syrup concentrate or syrup itself? Because they boiled it down a whole bundle, then they got concentrate, and then they trucked it over to the sugar factory, and then that becomes syrup. And so I wonder what the conversion ratio is between sap and concentrate. I mean, I guess he did say 2 and then 20, so maybe it's 10 times.
With this system, the Maple Guild can make 55 gallons of maple syrup in just 90 seconds. While in traditional boiling techniques, it can take anywhere between 9 and 56 hours to produce just 1 gallon of syrup.
I thought I was going to be overestimating a little bit, but I absolutely underestimated that. 9 to 56 hours for 1 gallon. What? Like I said, that is a completely different economy of scale. Let's say it does take 56 hours for 1 gallon. That means it takes what? 2,500 hours to get 55 gallons? Like, that is weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and these guys are doing it in 90 seconds, so no wonder you're just able to come out of nowhere and just suddenly be the biggest in the world, because no one can compete with that. I mean, I certainly hope that they patented that steam machine, because, oh man, you're just going to be taking over the entire world. All of a sudden, the Canadian government's going to be coming on board just so you can just keep up with the supply that they need, because that is absolutely ridiculous. You just honestly need a bigger farm, because it seems like the machine just is longing for it.
Not only is the steam crafting method quicker, but the company says it also produces a more nuanced maple flavor. Because sap can go bad quickly, it has to be transported to the sugar house within 3 hours of being tapped, and usually within 6 hours it will become that golden maple syrup.
What I'm wondering now, though, is what do they actually count as being tapped? Because do they mean straight from the tree, or do they mean as soon as it comes into the pump house? Because surely, if you're going from tree to jar, I don't know how you'd even do that, even with a vacuum system. As what, by the time it travels through a couple of kilometers of tubing all the way to the pump house, that's surely got to be at least half an hour, if not an hour, and then you got to process it, and then you got to truck it somewhere, and then you got to process it again. And even though you can do it in 90 seconds, how are they ever going to do it when it takes 56 days? Oh no, 56 hours. That is where I'm getting completely lost from the entire thing. But hey, what do I know about it? I'm here to learn, but I'm just bewildered because it just sounds like magic.
When the sap is running, it can run for a day, it can run for a week, and then it can stop for 2 days or 3 weeks.
Right.
And it's really whatever the weather gives us. But whenever that sap is running, we will have people at this plant 18, 24 hours a day non-stop while that sap is running, because we can't afford to lose any of it.
Once the sap's turned into syrup, it's tested to make sure the sugar levels are right. Next, it's sent through filters to remove impurities, and it's tested for grading. The lighter the color of syrup, the higher the grade. Because the Maple Guild syrup has a short cooking time, it's lighter in color, giving it a consistent grade A golden rating. The golden syrup is then pumped into stainless steel barrels, where it's stored until it's time to be bottled up. Each bottle is filled, capped, cleaned, and labeled by hand here. The company expects to fill over 1 million bottles this year.
Okay. Well, geez, they're certainly throwing out a whole bundle of numbers here, but I never knew that the high-quality maple syrups were lighter. I would have expected quite the opposite. You know, you want that rich, dark maple syrup, but apparently not. I mean, I guess you do go from that looking like olive oil to that somewhere along the lines, and so I don't know where and when it kind of does that. Or maybe, I guess, if you're kind of looking at the top, it is kind of olive oily, isn't it? So I guess that is certainly something to look out for. Even though I don't think Australia has that many brands of maple syrup, I can certainly try my best. And then I guess going back to the entire corn syrup battle that they were having, you know, I can only imagine that the corn syrup kind of, even though it's a different product, it might, if people know that the lighter maple syrup is better, it kind of plays on that entire mindset and goes, okay, that's really easy because we're corn.
The Maple Guild is vertically integrated, meaning it owns every step of this process, from tree to table.
The maple industry has been stagnant for decades upon decades upon decades.
Wow.
It's all small farmers doing their own thing on their own property, selling to the big agglomerators, and those guys making syrup, mostly private label, some branded, and selling it out to the industry until we came along. And we're a vertically integrated, we own the trees right through the manufacturing, very capital intensive, which is probably the barriers to entry for anybody else to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was saying, even with that 90-second machine, that thing would have cost an absolute bomb, let alone all the other stainless steel, even the trucks and all the food grade stuff that you have to be buying, constantly just cleaning and all those kind of things. There was so much infrastructure that just goes into actually running a food processing plant like this. You can understand why people don't get into it. They do smaller batches because just to expand to this scale is just basically a headache that most people can't deal with. But if you do manage to do it, you can absolutely see the proof is in the pudding with these guys, just how they managed to reap the rewards. They would be absolutely loaded for one, but they clearly can also make an incredible product and also just control everything about it in terms of what trees, how destructive they are, just all those aspects that are just great in every aspect.
In the last 5 years, the maple syrup industry has undergone somewhat of a revolution, and at the forefront are companies like the Maple Guild. Canada has historically dominated this market, producing 70% of the world's maple syrup. And while it still owns the top spot, the US is gaining ground.
Wow, okay.
United States production has doubled in the last decade, rising from 1.9 million gallons produced in 2008 to 4.16 million in 2018.
1.8 million gallons. Wow. Honestly, I'm trying to even fathom how much that really is because I don't even deal with gallons in the first place, but I'm just trying to imagine how many trees and how much sap you even have to just pull out of the entire ground, or I mean ground via the tree in terms of just water content. Like how much water and snow and everything are you actually just pulling up to even get that much? That's insane. I mean, I guess if you do compare it to things like oil, then it absolutely pales in comparison because generally people measure barrels of oil in billions and maybe even trillions if you really doing like the USA does, but surely it comes as no surprise to anyone that Canada owns 70%, if not 97% of the market, because no one even thinks of any other country but Canada when they're thinking maple syrup, or at least not the good stuff anyway. And so even though the USA might be catching up and just producing more and more and more, honestly, all they're doing is just helping Canada's name out because everyone's just going to go, this is the good stuff, this came from North America. What do you mean North America? Nah, this must have come from Canada, I swear.
And leading the charge is Vermont, dubbed the maple syrup capital of the U.S.
Wow. Okay.
The tiny state produces 40% of the maple syrup in the entire United States. In fact, Vermont's production has grown 254% since 2000.
Okay.
So the market was set for a large-scale production. but no one in the Vermont maple industry had taken on the unconventional sugaring model. Until the Maple Guild. It entered the scene as demand was taking off. Breweries across the state had started using maple syrup in their products. Overseas interest in pure maple syrup had spiked, and Americans on a health food kick were turning to maple syrup as a natural alternative to refined sugar.
Oh, okay. I was really going to be caught back if they said, oh, they were going to be going on a diet of maple syrup. I was going, hang on a second, what are you talking about? But no, compared to refined sugar, I mean, I guess I can only take their word on it, but it makes sense how something that's going to be super processed and super refined is going to come with a few more caveats than something that is basically 100% natural, minus the boiling. And so I guess like any good business, it really came down to the timing and execution of that business, because they clearly identified a gap in the market. For goodness sake, it's all over everything. Unlike anything I've ever seen, I think the only place I've ever really seen it is on pancakes and those sorts of foods, certainly not in any beers or whatever else you might be chucking it in.
And the Maple Guild is still riding that wave, selling branded products across 50 states, and infusing its syrups with flavors like coffee, pumpkin spice, and bourbon.
You got original,
That sounds
vanilla,
deadly.
bourbon, coffee, and salted caramel. It smells like the woods, which is where it came from. It tastes like sugar. I'm in.
Funny that.
And while it all depends on what Mother Nature gives them, the Maple Guild does have an annual production goal.
Our goals are 150 to 200,000 gallons of maple syrup. We'd be okay with.
Would be okay with? Hang on a second, you'd be okay with 150 to 200,000 gallons, so you're doing 200,000 times 44, what's that, like nearly 1 million gallons? Is that right? Of pure sap extracted out of the tree? Like, that is so much water and so much sugar. And that's the thing that I don't really understand. Where does the sugar content even come from the tree? Like, how does it making the sugar in the first place? Is it just getting light and water and then it just makes sugar? How does it do that? I really don't know. I'd love to know. But like I was saying, all those different flavors just sound absolutely deadly in terms of just targeting so many different markets as well. You have the original so everyone can buy it, but then if people are feeling a little bit more like they want to be adults, then they can just get the bourbon and the coffee and all the different things, so it just really becomes inclusive for everyone. And so of course you're just having ridiculous sales.
The company's not only bottling it up as syrup, but using it in about 17 other maple-based products.
Wow,
First,
okay.
there's the maple butter. Maple syrup is cooked down and then poured into this mixer until it becomes a luscious cream. That stuff is cooked and jarred by hand and then hits the assembly line to be capped and labeled.
Wow.
This is what I've been waiting for this whole time. It's like icing. That's so good.
There's also naturally fermented maple vinegar, 8 different maple sweetened teas, and 7 unique maple sweetened waters. The Maple Guild hopes that by introducing maple into as many categories as possible, it can show the versatility of the product and bring attention to where the golden syrup comes from.
I mean, look, that might be a pretty good byproduct and a pretty good excuse for just wanting to extend your tentacles all over the land, but for goodness sake, there is no way you can ignore the fact that they're just trying to make as many products as they can, because, well, why not? Then you just expand your tentacles all over the land. I mean, for goodness sake, I certainly want to try maple butter sometime, because that just sounds ridiculous, and I don't know, is it creamy in terms of, is it milk content, or do they just add other things to it? Because I'm fairly sure they said it, but I didn't even pick it up, because I was too busy being devastated by the fact that that machine isn't the caramel adder.
Maple syrup is cooked down and then poured into this mixer until it becomes a luscious cream.
Okay, so yeah, it is actually then re-cooked down again. Maple syrup then just goes into a fourth state of matter and just becomes butter. I mean, it gets similar to milk. You just keep mixing it and you go from milk to cream to butter to cheese, and you just keep going, and then you just end up in maple syrup apparently.
And bring attention to where the golden syrup comes from, here in a Vermont forest. Next up for the Maple Guild, kombucha, a kefir drinking water, and nitro coffee, all made from and sweetened by pure Vermont maple syrup.
Wow. They really are just going after every single product they can, but hey, hats off to them. When they are just putting that much capital and just that much expertise into making what they do best, then absolutely go for it. Like, they're clearly just doing things differently to everyone else to be able to just go from 56 hours to 90 seconds. And so I guess next time that I am looking for a bit of maple syrup, because it does last a while, and I don't even know if I have any, but at the same time, next time I am, I will just have to see if I can even get any of this stuff, because why not support these guys? They clearly are doing a good job, and if nothing else, gotta get that maple butter. But anyway, in saying saying that, I reckon I'm going to call it there. So thank you for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, feel free to do the YouTube algorithm things down below. Also, if this is the first video that you are watching, then make sure to go check out any other ones I've done. Also, make sure to go check out that awesome video down in the description below. Or hey, maybe even just want to consider subscribing so that you don't miss another one of these in the future. But all in all, have a good one and see ya.